All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the most psychologically intense moments you'll find in alternative relationships, the cuckold's morning after. Okay, picture this. The alarm is blaring, sunlight is slicing through the blinds, and that intense, erotic bubble from the night before, it just pops. The fantasy has officially collided with the harsh light of day. And this moment right here is where the real work actually starts. It's this super vulnerable, exposed transition where a relationship can either get incredibly strong or it can fracture. So what is actually going on in the heads of everyone involved? To really get it, we first have to wrap our heads around a central contradiction, a paradox, really, that completely rewrites a very old cultural script. You know, our society has a name for this, right? The walk of shame. And it is just loaded with regret, with judgment. But in this dynamic, it's often totally reframed as conscious vulnerability. That feeling of exposure isn't seen as shameful at all. Instead, it's the foundation for some really profound intimacy and growth. It's a deliberate choice to be emotionally wide open at the most sensitive time imaginable. So why is this moment just so emotionally charged? Well, it's not just psychology, it's predictable brain chemistry. Let's take a look at what's happening on a neurochemical level. So during the encounter, the brain is flooded with this incredibly potent cocktail. You've got dopamine, that's the pleasure and novelty chemical. You've got adrenaline from all the stress and excitement. And then you have oxytocin, the bonding hormone that's released during intimacy. It's a massive chemical high. But then the morning hits, and it is a perfect storm. Your body naturally pumps out the stress hormone cortisol when you wake up. It's called the cortisol awakening response. And that spike collides head-on with a massive crash from the night's dopamine party. It's literally a recipe for intense emotional swings. You know, this whole phenomenon is actually really similar to the well-known sub-drop in the BDSM community. Here, it's often called the cuck drop or the hotwife drop. It's that period of vulnerability, anxiety, maybe even sadness as your brain's chemistry just tries to find its balance again. This isn't just you being in your feelings. It's a real physiological event. And here's the kicker. This chemical come-down isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. Not at all. Each person involved wakes up in a completely different psychological landscape. Let's break it down. For the cuckold, he often wakes up wrestling with what you could call erotic anxiety. The big question looping in his head is, after all that, does she still choose me? The hotwife, on the other hand, is navigating attachment ambiguity. She's bonded with the bull, but now needs to reconnect with her primary partner, asking, how do I bridge this gap? And the bull? He can feel a bit of role confusion. The event is over, so now what? What's my role now? What are the boundaries? 3 people, 3 totally different internal worlds. So you can see how this split in experience creates 2 massive hurdles that absolutely have to be cleared for the relationship to thrive. And those are comparison and communication. During the night, the whole idea of the bull being better or bigger can be a huge part of the erotic fantasy. But in the morning light, when you're emotionally raw and that chemical buffer is just gone, that same comparison can feel absolutely crushing. And that, right there, is the comparison trap. So the way these truths are framed is everything. A statement like this one, it's just purely comparative. It creates a competition. It positions the husband as inferior, and that can be incredibly damaging. But now, contrast that with this framing. It's sharing the same core truth. The sex was amazing, but it gives the credit for the experience back to the primary relationship. It makes the husband the architect of his wife's pleasure, not a competitor. That shift in framing makes all the difference. So how do you actually get there? Well, couples who really nail this often use a pretty simple protocol. It starts with a gentle, open-ended check-in. How are you feeling this morning? Then each person has to clearly state their needs. Something like, I'm feeling a little shaky and could use some reassurance, not an accusation. And finally, and this is so key, you validate each other's feelings, even if they're messy or hard to hear. Communication is the bridge, for sure. But what's on the other side? Well, couples use very intentional rituals to physically and emotionally lock back in and reestablish their primary bond. The first ritual is aftercare, and it's a concept borrowed directly from BDSM communities. It's not just for one person either. It involves emotional care, reassurance, creating that safe space for total honesty, and physical care too, maybe a warm bath, comfort, simple non-sexual touch. It's about taking care of the whole person. And this often leads to what's called reclamation sex. Now, this isn't about trying to compete with the bull. It's a really powerful psychological act. It's about reasserting the primacy of the main bond. It's about taking all that heightened, adventurous energy and channeling it right back into the core relationship, making it even more intense and connected. So when you start to put all these pieces together, the chemistry, the communication, the rituals, you see this really remarkable transformation start to happen. This quote it nails it. That intense, raw, emotional exposure of the morning after, it isn't a problem that needs to be solved. In this dynamic, it's the entire point. It's the feature that when you navigate it with intention, forces a level of honesty and intimacy that a lot of conventional relationships might never even touch. And this is the ultimate reframe. That vulnerable walk, so loaded with cultural baggage, is completely transformed. It becomes a walk of pride. Pride in the relationship's strength, in its communication, and in the sheer courage it takes to explore authenticity together. Which really leaves us with one last fascinating question to chew on. We tend to think of vulnerability as a weakness, don't we? But what if that's all wrong? What if facing our most exposed, uncertain moments together isn't what breaks relationships, but what actually forges the strongest bonds of all?